The International Association for Near-Death Studies presents NDE Radio, a weekly exploration of near-death experiences and similar encounters with the other side. Now, here's your host, Lee Witting.
Welcome to NDE Radio, brought to you by IANDS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies. I'm your host, Lee Witting. One of the religious parallels to the near-death experience is the path to the afterlife as described in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Like the NDE, the book describes the journey of the soul and what it may encounter along the way. Our guest today is studying the psychological implications for life in the Tibetan Book of the Dead and is looking at new technology to present it to the world in a deeply meaningful way. Our guest, Susan Griffith-Jones, is speaking to us today from her home in Indian Himalayas. And based on decades of research and study with Tibetan spiritual masters in both Nepal and India, Susan's passion and purpose is to bring the ancient wisdom teachings of the East to a wider modern audience in the English language using different forms of art through varying interfaces. A creative, innovative artist, Susan is gifted in intuiting the meaning of allegories and in understanding both the psychology of the West and the East in a unique combination. She's published 6 books to date, as well as taken tens of thousands of photos worldwide that she assimilates into large photo collages, art pieces, each comprised of more than 100 photos laid out in mosaic. Susan's articles have been published in numerous newspapers and magazines around the globe, including an exclusive weekly column with the Weekly Tribune newspaper, London, in which she talks about her travels, personal experiences, places she's visited, and her encounters with the people there. Her artistic documentary films displaying the wonderful spiritual epicenters of South Asia may be seen on her website, www.pyramidkey.com. Susan, welcome to NDE Radio.
Hi, Lee. I wasn't expecting such a long exposure of who I am and what I do and what I've done. That was quite interesting to actually have to listen to that from somebody else's, through somebody else's voice.
Well, I guess you'll have to strive not to accomplish so much if you want to avoid further long introductions. I should tell our audience that Susan and I met on the ACE shuttle to Sedona, Arizona a couple of months back and got into perhaps the most interesting conversation that bus has ever seen. It included pyramids, reincarnation, virtual reality tech, and Tibetan
And it was
Buddhist
like midnight
masters.
or something, wasn't it? Because my flight had got delayed into Phoenix and you guys had to wait like an hour for me or something. Yeah,
Well,
that was it was a great chat, and I'm really, really happy to extend that conversation now into the radio show, because actually something that you mentioned there, doing so much with your life, it's true actually, because time is. I don't want to go off at a tangent here. Do stop me if I am. Time is something that I believe and I hesitate to use the word control, but we guide through the way that we experience our own consciousness. Mm-hmm. And I want to lead that into the Tibetan Book of the Dead, because, of course, what we're seeing in the Tibetan Book of the Dead is nothing but consciousness seen through different states of its own self, right. And Susan, different aspects.
Before we get into the Tibetan Book of the Dead, I wanted you to tell the audience just briefly how a girl from the UK wound up studying with a great Tibetan master.
Well, if I could answer that question, then I would be answering one of the greatest mysteries that any of us could even start to contemplate. I mean, ending up at the feet of a master or ending up anywhere in any situation is itself like a labyrinth. It's a path to an unknown destination. Even though we may have a focal point, like I want to be a lawyer, a doctor, or whatever, or I want to write, or I want to take photographs, it doesn't matter what the focus point is. We are never actually going to be able to describe or even control how we get to that place and time. And even if that focal point isn't necessarily there in the beginning and we don't really know even the path that we're walking towards and what we're going to reach at the end of it, still it's a complete mystery as to why we turn left instead of right, why we get in that car instead of take the train, why we decide to go to that destination instead of to go there. What provokes us into making those kind of decisions? And I'm not talking about big life-changing decisions that we take at sort of crossroads in our lives. Who am I going to marry, or blah, blah, blah. I'm talking about, do I turn left or right? Simple things that we have to answer through the movement of our day. Am I going to drink coffee or tea this morning? I mean,
well, what were the lefts and the rights that took you to Tibet?
You know, I honestly speaking can't answer that question, but I know how it began. And that's probably the only thing I have, because with the injection of the right intention, of course, theoretically speaking, it should lead to the result or the intended result. So I know that it was something that came from very, very deep within, and something that I also had no real rational basis to say what it was. But I had an overriding feeling that if I were to follow my heart, then I would find the very thing that I was looking for, and I did not even know what that thing was. So can you imagine when people were asking me, why are you going out into the world traveling? What are you doing with your life? And I was basically always answering the same answer to each of these questions was, I'm going to find something that I need to know about. And I don't know what that is yet, but I know that I will find it. Oh, but how are you going to do that? It's impossible to know whether, these were the kind of questions coming back at me. And then I would say, well, the only thing I actually really, really need to do is to follow my heart. And I know that sounds extremely naive and very, very sort of not down to earth or touching the ground. But I'm not meaning it from that perspective. I do mean it from a sense that, follow my heart means that, if the signs and the situation is presenting itself in such a way and the signs are completing that situation, presenting it in some way, then I should go for it, whatever that go for it is. Jump on a bus at London Victoria and get off at Calais, France, for example, which is what I did. That was my first ticket out of the UK, was to Calais, just a hop across the channel. And from there, I said, I take each day as it comes. I turn left, I turn right, I do whatever comes in front of me, and I know I will find whatever this thing is that I need to find.
Had you had any interest in the Book of the Dead before going to studying at the feet of this master?
Well, not really, but it was one of the indications that I had on my path that I was going in the right direction. I started writing a lot, in fact, writing so much, and also the things that were coming out in my writing, and I'm talking about now sort of 25 plus years ago, and the sort of things that were coming out in my writing were so different to anything that I'd ever heard of or had ever studied or learnt about or heard about even, that I just had to let it come in a way that was not judgmental or even too questioning, because had I questioned it at that point, it wouldn't have been as flowing as it was. And at some point, I really, really thought I was going mad. There was absolutely nobody in my environ who I could discuss what was coming through me and what I was writing down. It just didn't bear any kind of rationality in the world that I lived in. And I started to really sincerely, from the very, very bottom of my heart, call out for a guide. I was like, there's no way that I can traverse this landscape of my mind, whatever's coming through my mind at this moment through my writing. There's no way I can traverse this landscape without a guide. I mean, I've gone as far as I can go alone. And if I go any further, then I'm in danger of becoming mad, because I had no way of rationally being able to hold on to what I was saying as a truth or as a madness. So I think it was that extremely, I mean, this is one of those moments where you pour your entire heart into an intention and into a wish and into a desire. I mean, I know every day we're saying, oh, I wish this, I wish that. But that moment that you really say, I need it with all my heart. My life depends on it. Without this, I'm not going to be able to go any further. It was that kind of intention, that kind of vibration. And I think that was probably what created the potential to walk on that path towards that particular destination. Mm. And you asked about the Book of the Dead particularly. Around the same time, I picked up a book in an airport, one of these stationaries at an airport. And it was a book called The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. And this, actually, I discovered later that this was a phenomenal success across the whole world. One Rinpoche, Lama Tsokyi Rinpoche, had written this book in conjunction with some of his very senior students. And it was an explanation of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. So it wasn't the Tibetan Book of the Dead per se, which is much more sort of cloaked in its own imagery and language, which you would expect from a Tibetan classic. But this was like given a very Western feel to it, and also really brought into the open this question of death and how we die, and do we die well? I mean, it was talking about Western people. Do we live our whole lives escaping this question, and only when we meet with a disease that's going to end in our death, or when we come into contact with somebody we know dying, only then do we start thinking about death? And pretty much the answer to that question was yes. I mean, we're talking about 20, 30, 40 years ago now, 80s, 90s. I do think, however, that now the question of death is much, much more open in the Western world than it was in the 80s and 90s. And that has become also much, much easier to talk about spirituality and books and classics like the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which are so poignant and so pertinent to our day-to-day living as well as our whole existence. I mean, the Tibetan Book of the Dead is talking about an entire existence of, a kind of spiral existence. It, going round and round and round, and kind of in a sense of evolving and improving kind of situation, although it does mention that we can go backwards as well, so devolve. But
the bardo, which is described in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, that sort of intermediate state between the two lives on Earth, is so parallel to the near-death experience.
That's right.
A momentary vision, momentary enlightenment that people experience when their soul leaves their bodies briefly. And
absolutely.
I think some of those accounts, some of those NDE accounts have also done a lot to open up people's interest in death and what happens when we die.
Yes, and the fact that we're able to document that now, I mean, and the fact that people are able to come back from the dead because we've got such sophisticated medical equipment, and in surgery people do flatline, say, for 2 minutes, 3 minutes or whatever, but because of the capacity of the equipment we have, we can bring them back, so to speak, and they've been able to report these incredible journeys. And I mean, I just wanted to add something to what you were saying there, because you're very right in the sense that the bardo between birth and death is death and birth is very similar to what the near-death experience people have commented on. But I want to be very, very sure that our listeners understand that, and probably there are people out there who are familiar with the book as well, but for those who are not so familiar, the bardos are mentioned not just as one particular bardo between the process of dying and the process of being reborn, but each stage of our life and death and in between is itself a bardo period of time. So now we who are incorporating a human body, we are in the bardo of life, and it's called bardo of life. Bardo means, it literally means in between two things. So in between two things in the context of life means in between being born and in between dying. So the moment we make contact with a disease that's going to end in our demise, or an accident that's going to end in us dying, then we enter the bardo of dying. I mean, they have more technical names. I'm just giving the English terms of the bardos here. So bardo of dying would mean from that moment that you contact something that's going to end in your demise to the moment that you actually die is also a bardo period. It's between two things. And again, on into that is the period. This bardo of dying is the period that is so very close to the near-death experience reports. Because as I understand it, in near-death experience, you won't get much further into the next bardo, which is actually the main bardo that happens next is the bardo of becoming. And experts on the Tibetan Book of the Dead will know that there is another bardo in between that, called the bardo of Dharmata, which is slightly more complicated, and also something that potentially only people who have really practiced and meditate would actually see those kind of visions. So what we're going to do is skip straight from bardo of dying into the bardo of becoming, which is possibly what most of the people who experience near-death experience would see. So from that coming out into the light, then the meeting of the relatives and friends who've passed away, that's called the bardo of becoming. And again, between two means the moment you enter the bardo of becoming and the moment that you are going to take birth or enter into the womb of a mother of whichever creature on earth you may be karmically pulled towards. Then that ends the period of the bardo of becoming, and bang, round comes the circle again. We're back in the bardo of life, which is the period between birth and death. And Tibetans consider taking birth as as starting at conception. If you ever hear, if it's a Tibetan's birthday, for example, they're always 1 or even 2 years ahead of their actual age, because the moment they're born, they're considered 1 year old. And if their birthday were, for example, just 1 week before the new year of the Tibetans, which happens around every February, then at that new year, you would turn 2. So actually, at the age of 1 week, you could be 2 years old. That's kind of interesting, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And it's something that I always comment on when my husband tells his age, and I cut it down by 2 years, because I'm actually citing his example exactly, that he was born a week before this new year, and therefore by the time he was 1 week old, he was actually 2 years old, considered as 2 years old.
So
whereas we in the West,
I was going to say they consider the soul to enter the physical body at the moment of conception.
That's right. Well, I know that there are other things about that, so I wouldn't want to say for sure at the moment of conception, but certainly by the time you are born, which is, they say 10 lunar months or 9 point something months in the solar calendar, then you are considered as 1 year old. And that may even be pertaining to the lunar calendar, which is, of course, not as long as the solar calendar. So, we have to think of all sorts of variants when we come to talking about Tibetan sense of time versus Western sense of time.
Yes.
Even when, the moment a Western child is born, then, 365 days have to go past until he or she becomes 1 full year old. So we're always sort of in arrears, so to speak. We get our year after we've done it, not before we've done it. Yeah. No, it's one of the things that we should also be aware about when we're studying the Tibetan Book of the Dead, is the aspect of time. It's obviously very key.
One of the things about time in the near-death experience is that a person can be out of their body for a minute, and yet it seems to them like they've been gone for a month. So that whole sense of time on the other side is very much different than ours.
not just on the other side. I mean, just think of in a dream, you can hit up for 6 in the morning and decide, wake up at 5:30 and say, hey, I'm going to go back to sleep again, have a 20-minute sleep. And in that dream, you can be gone for goodness knows how long. So all different types of consciousness are experiencing time in a different way. And I come back to what we were originally talking about at the beginning of this conversation, that we stretch time during the day. I notice, and I'm not sure if this is completely true, I couldn't say for sure, but it's what I've noticed about in my own experience, is that the slower I go, the more I accomplish within the same amount of time. And so people always ask me, how do you do so much? And you seem to be like here today, there tomorrow, and the next day somewhere else. And my new motto has become go fast, slow, which if we're put into correct English would be go quickly, slowly. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So go fast, slow. I just like the slogan better than go quickly, slowly. And now, it seems to work.
In the Bardo, they talk about peaceful and wrathful ones. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit and see how do you see that in psychological terms?
Yeah, sure. This is a big one as well. That is the section that I just cut out according to the near-death experience. They say, and again, I don't know the complete truth of this. I only know what I've experienced myself. They say that only if you are yourself an experienced practitioner and have purified your vision to a certain, or consciousness to a certain extent, would you be able to actually be able to perceive these entities within your post-death conscious state. Now, something happens at the moment of death, according to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which is so incredible and awe-inspiring and amazing potential to, in inverted commas, jump out of the whole cycle, happens at the moment where the light reveals itself. And as the Tibetan Book of the Dead mentions, that is like a child jumping into his mother's lap or her mother's lap. And there's no doubt about it, that the allegory of the child jumping into the mother's lap, is that sense of there being no doubt and that sense of this being this incredible love and bond between, it's like this state of mind, this small state of mind that this small state of consciousness that you've just left the material world from, is now merging back into its holistic being, so to speak. So that idea of son or daughter jumping into mother's lap. But if you are not prepared for that, or if you have not had certain signs and visions and meditation experience also already within your lifetime, it may be so awe-inspiring when that moment comes, even psychologically speaking, that you may just run away in terror. And this is where I'm coming on to answer your question, because that terror will make you faint. And as you know, often in sleep, we're not aware that we're even sleeping. We're kind of just in a state of, I don't know, it's nothing. It's neither here nor there. And we only become aware once we come into a dream. And even in a dream, we don't necessarily become aware that we're in the dream as in a lucid state of dreaming. So this is the point, that once we're in the state of faint, this is the period of time that ordinarily these peaceful and wrathful deities would come to greet you. And they'd only come to greet you to push you on, and to remind you of what you're really doing at this moment. It's like, okay, you've missed the clear light state. You didn't jump into it as if it were your being, which it is, your absolute being, which it is. So now you've come into this next state, this bardo of dharmata, it's called. And these are the nice deities talking. They look very kind of angelic and beautiful and bright and lovely lights and colors. And they have got holding things in their hands, which are all symbols for this and that. And they all have some kind of psychological parallel as well. And one will come to you and say, hey, just remember who you are, remember. And if you at that moment have the recognition of this being who's coming in front of you, and you remember that they really are this greater sense of who you are, then if you jump into their heart, you can be also liberated in that moment. So it's another, the peaceful deities, and then if the peaceful deities pass and their sweet little remember hasn't worked, then the wrathful deities come with their remember, like this much more kind of vociferous and loud, and the clashing of drums and cymbals, and they look terrifying, and so it's like this way of saying, wake up, which is what life does to us as well. And this is again the point. These wrathful and peaceful deities are all around us in our life as we go from A to B. You know, people are giving us hints and indications. We were talking about this road, this path that we walk upon from here to another place in our life. And how do we get there? It's a complete mystery. But we have pointers on the way. These peaceful and wrathful deities are saying, this way, just remember, come on, this way, this one, remember the result. You know, so they're kind of like guides, and they are they're mirrors, obviously mirrors of your own psychological state and your own ability to see your inherent nature as well. They are wisdom beings. They're not angry people with that base sense of anger, you know, getting angry because of an egotistical sense. This is wrath and pure, this is compassion. Wrath has that, is the rough edge of the one extreme of compassion, which is having that such forceful, it's like a mother saying to a child who's playing with the knife, it's like, don't play with that knife. You know, she's not angry. She's just incredibly loving to give this child this knowledge that playing with a knife is dangerous.
So are the wrathful deities then acting out of love, or are they acting out of...
Totally. Out of love for you, out of your love, out of your compassion. This is your mirror, remember. I mean, this is all your own mirror.
So this is two extremes of our own duality, or the duality of the nature of the world.
Which comes around like yin yang. It's not separate from each other. It's not like the end of two lines. It's like a circle. It comes around to the other extreme again.
Right. Susan, believe it or not, we have just gone through our half hour. But you and I have planned that you will come back tomorrow, next Monday, not tomorrow, but
sure.
next Monday too. And we'll continue from there.
Yes, that would be a pleasure.
In the meantime, please tell our audience how they can find your books and your website.
Well, everything of mine is on my website, which is, as Lee mentioned at the beginning of the show, www.pyramidkey.com. That's as in pyramid, like the pyramids in Egypt or Mexico or wherever, and key as in something that you would open a door with. So pyramidkey.com. And yeah, everything's divided into different sections there, books and films, etc., etc.
Thanks. We'll be talking again next Monday.
Sure.
If listeners would like to listen to this show again or any of our past shows, just go to our website at nderadio.org and hit the past shows button. And for information about IANDS, go to their website at IANDS.org. And be with us again next Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern, for more discussion with Susan Griffith-Jones on NDE Radio. This is your host, Lee Witting, saying thanks for listening.